Fair warning, if you already know that you're not a fan of Geoff Johns Green Lantern run, then this video is not going to be for you. Woof woof! Hey guys, it's me Marcus, aka the Maddogg, and we're back with another video. Now I'll be the first to admit that I can often be quite hyperbolic, and there's been a few times on this channel that I've announced that a comic is just the best. And rather than admitting that there might be a chance that I'm wrong, I'd rather take the egotistical approach of doing a full-on video talking about why I'm probably right. So last time I did this type of video we looked at Ultimate Spider-Man, but today we're going to be looking at Geoff Johns' historic run on Green Lantern. And starting this list off at number 10, I've got the fact that it gave the Guardians a storyline. And I'm not saying that Geoff Johns' run is the first time that the Guardians ever really got a plot that centered around them, but I feel like their importance was obvious throughout the entire series. Because when I was growing up and I did read comics that featured Green Lantern, I often thought that they were in a similar league as something like the Celestials, or maybe just like the Watchers, and that this organisation that exists to make sure that balance is restored. But what Geoff Johns did is give each individual member of the Guardians their own personality and also their own agency. So there were rifts that went on within the Guardians, people had to take sides, and there were debates going on that connected to the wider story, some of which had lasting consequences or wider implications for the DC universe as a whole. Before I read Geoff Johns' Green Lantern run, I didn't care about the Guardians, and I'd often think that they were taking time away from the bigger action that I cared about. But Johns made it so that I cared as much about the Guardians storyline as I did about Hal Jordan, Kyle Rayner, or just any of the Lanterns. Number 9, a bit of a broad one, but it's the art. I don't think there's many people that I could give this series of omnibuses to when they flick through it and not impressed by at least one artist that worked on this title. And I also think that if you opened any of these books up at any page, you would stumble onto something that just looks phenomenal. Obviously the big standouts for me were Ivan Rice and Ethan Van Sciver, even though I know there are controversies surrounding him. But then later on you had phenomenal work by Doug Monkey, which is a name that I'm still not sure if I'm pronouncing correctly. You had Carlos Pacheco, and you also had Darwin Cook doing a couple of pages for one of the specials. There was top tier talent throughout this book, and it shows. And what I liked best is that each artist brought something different to the table. In my eyes, this is some of the best art that's ever been done for some of the intergalactic DC Universe books, and it's difficult to top it, and I think it's going to be even longer before we see another run that goes on for this long have such a phenomenal cast of artists throughout it. But to address one of my own controversies for a moment, when I did my top 10 reasons that Ultimate Spider-Man is just the best, I had a few people accusing me of actually making that a top 15, which is a disgusting accusation. To have people think that I'd only list it as a top 10 list so that it would be better for the algorithm, it offends me. And I'd hate for the same accusations to be thrown at me in this video, because if I was going to make this a top 15, I'd have to have something in 15th place. And you know, if you're twisting my arm, I guess I'd have the fact that this made outside of DC's Earth as interesting as inside it. Now I know this is primarily because of the time when I was reading this series, but I hadn't read a lot of intergalactic DC books. Sure, I love characters like Lobo, but that's mostly because he's Lobo. But even Green Lantern as a character was somebody that I saw as an Earthbound hero. Yeah, of course, often the Justice League would go in some kind of Wayne Enterprise funded spaceship and go off and fight on a different planet, but they'd always come back to Earth at the end. Even the Watchtower was always just outside of Earth, so it didn't even really feel that distant. Geoff Johns' Green Lantern run made me pay attention to other planets and sectors and characters that I might not have noticed before. And because of that, this series massively helped to expand my knowledge of the wider DC universe. And then because of that, I paid attention to what Marvel was doing with Annihilation and the Guardians of the Galaxy. So this series was fundamental for me exploring more than just Earth within the big two publishers. Number 8, and I know some people are going to disagree with me on this, but I'm going to go with Kyle Rayner. Now Kyle Rayner was actually my first Green Lantern because he featured quite heavily in Grant Morrison's JLA, so you think I'd actually see it as a negative him not being the main character in this series. But he's so heavily involved, and I think he still did a tremendous job when he wasn't the title character. A lot of stuff happened to him throughout Geoff Johns' time on this title, involving Ion and Parallax, and I think Geoff Johns did a lot to evolve Kyle so that he could have some new and interesting storylines. But even if Hal Jordan was taking centre stage, Johns made sure that Kyle just didn't disappear into the background, which it would have been very easy to do. They could have just made this an entirely Hal-centered story, but the fact that it still shows respect and time to the character that was carrying the lantern before Hal came back made me learn a lot more about him and the other Green Lanterns within this universe. Speaking of which, I'm going to go with the expansion of the Lantern Corps. The best part about this is that it's one of those developments that seems so obvious now that it's been done, because of course if there's a Green Lantern and Sinestro has a Yellow Lantern, there must be other colours on the spectrum throughout the universe. And I remember when I first saw the Indigo Lantern logo on a t-shirt at Forbidden Planet, I thought that this was just going to be a gimmick, especially then when they started doing all these rings, which, you know, I kind of had to collect. But what I loved whilst I was reading this series is that it allowed itself the time to establish each Lantern Corps as its own group. They weren't just a copy and paste of the Green Lanterns, but with a different hue applied, each one connected with an emotion which tied to the personalities of the members of that corps. Because of this, when the wider wider battles and wars were going on, it felt like the stakes were so much higher. Because we'd connected with each one of them, Hal Jordan had pretty much worn every ring by the time this series was finished. And often, especially in series that are trying to build up to a big company-wide event, it doesn't have that time to actually explore what it's talking about. But you always got the sense that Geoff Johns knew more about each Lantern Corps than he'd put on the page. Even if in hindsight now I still don't think I could tell you much about the Indigo Lanterns. But yeah, I am just kind of thinking about how much easier this would be if this was a top 15 list, because there'd be something that I would want to mention in 14th place. And I'm not officially including it, so I can still say top 10 in the title, but in 14th place I would include something like the Larfleeze Christmas special. I don't know about you guys, but I often don't look for a Christmas special when I'm getting into comics. Larfleeze to me was that anomaly throughout the Lantern Corps, and I didn't really know too much about it. He was just a bit greedy and had a weird horse looking face. And to counter the point that I made in 7th place, I thought that he was going to be the Lantern Corps that they mostly just forgot about. But this Christmas special was sweet and wholesome. He also managed to develop Larfleeze as a character. I sympathised with him a little bit, and I loved that they gave him and Hal Jordan a real moment. And I think throughout Geoff Johns' run on Green Lantern, it's so easy to remember the bigger moments, but there are a lot of great smaller stories that are scattered throughout it that can often be overlooked. Number 6, I'm going to go with the rebirth of the Green Lantern Corps. Now yes, this was something that was only started by Geoff Johns and then was taken over by Dave Gibbons and eventually Peter J. Tomasi and Patrick Gleason, but honestly when I look back on it, it feels like the Green Lantern Corps was something that was kind of its time. I can see why it hadn't really been a big thing throughout the DC universe for a good number of years before this, but what they emphasised and focused on is that at its core, the Green Lantern Corps ironically is a police force. So they took a lot of tropes that happened throughout crime dramas of having partners and having this more organised approach to it all, and brought that back to the forefront of DC Comics and made sure that the biggest names were at the front of it. So you had John Stewart, Kal Rayner, Guy Gardner and Kilowog right there at the front of it leading the charge. And because of that, they had a spin-off series that became as interesting to read as the main Green Lantern run. And what was great is that it felt like it was never too distant from the main thing that was going on for Hal Jordan, but it also never felt like it was just piggybacking off it. And that gave us these great crossover issues that led to stuff like the Sinestro Corps War and War of the Green Lanterns, but admittedly that's something that I'm going to talk about in an extra point. So you felt like the two series were always interweaving with each other, but they also worked on their own, which is why I'm very excited that Peter J. Tomasi has been hinting for years that this is finally going to get an omnibus. I've heard it's going to be 2024, but whenever it is, or if you wanted to pick up these omnibuses, you can get them from the channel sponsor, Organic Price Books. They've got great packaging, fast shipping and amazing customer services, and if you use code WOOFWOOF, you'll get $2 off your order. And if you're ordering 3 or more books and you want them to be delivered together, make sure you use code WOOFWOOF, ship it together for 5% off your entire order. Don't worry, you can just copy and paste them from the description down below and you can use these codes as many times as you like. It's funny though, talking about all these Lantern Corps, I kind of wish that I could give some kind of extra mention or, I don't know, 13th place to the Red Lanterns. And I'm not just talking about the Red Lanterns as a group, even though they have got Atrocitus and Dexter and just other characters that I really like, who, if I'm being honest, are probably some of the most interesting ones that have come out of this series. But I'm talking more so about their spin-off series that they got on the New 52, which, yep, still my jam. But to me, this is one of the most underrated series that exists from the New 52. It surprises me that more people don't talk about this. Yeah, I know that this wasn't written by Geoff Johns, but it was a byproduct of his run on Green Lantern, and the Red Lantern New 52 series gave us one of the best Guy Gardner stories that we've ever gotten. It makes sense that he would join up with the Red Lanterns, but it just gave us this really interesting story that really reminded me of something like Splinter Cell Double Agent. Yeah, I'm really showing my age there. But although I do love all the lanterns that were created as a result of this run, the red ones are definitely my favourite. And not just because I'm angry all the time. Number 5, all of the events that came out of this. Yeah, I'm talking the Sinestro Corps War, Blackest Night, and the incredibly underrated War of the Lanterns. Often with a series that goes on for this long, it would be a story of peaks and troughs, but it seems like Geoff Johns' run on Green Lantern is just a story of peaks and higher peaks. The events in this are amazing and some of the best that have ever come from either of the big two publishers. Last year for the season of events, I went back and reviewed Sinestro Corps War on its own, and it still holds up today. It was smaller scale, it was just between the Green Lantern books, but it still had wider ramifications on the DC universe, and it just told a really great and interesting story without losing focus on the battle between Hal Jordan and Sinestro. Then you have Blackest Night, which I'm going to review later on this year, so make sure you're subscribed, but this impacted the entire DC universe and it still managed to work. But then it brought it back to its own scale yet again for War of the Lanterns and just gave us a great story about the battle that was going on between these characters. And it was just great because each time you thought that this had reached its peak, it just stepped kept it up yet again. And the majority of the time that I've looked at a creator's run on a specific character, I've often pointed out that the series will get derailed if there's a big event that's going on. Yep, I'm still talking about you, Matt Fraction's Iron Man, but that wasn't the case with Green Lantern because DC had the trust of him to be controlling everything that was going on anyway. It's one of those rare times that the guy who's pulling the big strings is also telling the ongoing series. Number 4, I'm going with the fact that it carried its momentum into the New 52 and gave us one of the best Sinestro stories that we've ever had. And I feel like I'm saying that for a lot of the characters that I'm pointing out, but I will stand by that when it comes to Sinestro. I'm gonna have to spoil the concept, but he gets his Green Lantern ring back, and I just love the uneasy, awkward tension that goes on between him and Hal. Now, the New 52 was meant to reset the entire DC universe, and even though Geoff Johns was the one who wrote Flashpoint in the first place, it seems like he kind of just ignored that, but still took the chance to reset and brought the story back down to a ground level. It wasn't about all the Lanterns anymore because the vast majority of them had their own spin-off series anyway, so instead it went back to what it wanted to do from the beginning and just told a story about Hal and Sinestro. And overall, the New 52 does unfortunately have a bad reputation, which is something that I do not agree with, but I do love that Geoff Johns stuck with Green Lantern through that change, despite the fact that he was also doing Aquaman and Justice League, and I think he was doing another couple of titles as well, and gave us one of those titles that works as a great counterpoint to use anytime that somebody says that everything that came from the New 52 was bad. I've conveniently forgotten the number of the point that I'm on, but I guess I can have an extra one without it really affecting the title, because my 12 point or whatever point this ends up being is going to be the fact that this finally put some focus on one of the characters in the DC universe that wasn't part of the main trinity. Now, this may seem like a trivial thing, and over the years DC has always made a point of giving some of the characters focus, but it always felt like characters like Flash and Green Lantern and Green Arrow and all the others like that were off in their own corner, but Superman, Batman and Wonder Woman were always just shoved into your face. And don't get me wrong, I like them, but Geoff Johns' Green Lantern felt like the first time that he was front page news. Not actual front page news, because Superman has to die for that to happen. But all the focus was on him, and especially combined with something like 52, it felt like DC was finally paying attention to some of the other great characters that they had. They weren't just second tier, they could lead things, and they didn't just have to live in the shadow with the Trinity. I remember the number that I was at because in number 3, I've got the fact that this actually had an ending. How often do you get to say that a series that was coming out from either Marvel or DC that was part of the main universe and not the Ultimate series or an Elseworld tale, and was going to continue after that creator left, still had an ending that felt satisfying? Even some of my favourite titles like Daredevil by Bendis didn't get that chance because it had to set up for when Brubaker took over. But by the end of Geoff Johns' Green Lantern run, you could close the book, and if you never read a Green Lantern title again, you would have a satisfying ending. I don't know about you guys, but that's just something that I never really see happening. And obviously, yeah, by the time he was leaving this title, Geoff Johns was a much bigger name over at DC, but the fact that DC let him do that, despite the fact that they knew somebody else was going to publish the next issue the month after, phenomenal to me, and it meant that this felt like a complete reading experience. Number 2, I'm going to go with the redemption of Hal Jordan. Now, yeah, when Parallax first infected him during Emerald Twilight, I didn't really know what was happening because of the fact that I wasn't born. But it was during that 90s era where DC and Marvel just wanted to ruin the characters that people had loved for years. And from when I was watching iFanboy when I was first getting into comics, they talked about how monumental of a task Geoff Johns had. I don't really understand the full weight of that, but I'm still impressed with the fact they managed to do it. Green Lantern Rebirth didn't shy away from the fact that Jordan's reputation was tarnished, but Geoff Johns managed to find a way to bring Hal Jordan back into the light without ignoring all the bad things that he'd done, and in a believable way for the universe that they're in, and he also just managed to bring Hal Jordan back as the Green Lantern. Sure, Kyle Rayner might have been my first, for others it might be Alan Scott or Guy Gardner, but if you ask me to picture Green Lantern in my head, it's always going to be Hal Jordan, and that's because of this run. Now, before I tell you my top pick, I do want to have an honourable mention. I guess between you and me, our little secret, we'll call it the 11th place, because then I guess I can get away with calling this a top 10, because this definitely hasn't been a top 15. But my 11th pick would be that time when Hal Jordan punched Batman. Now, yeah, I'm a massive Batman fan, but still, this is just one of those moments that you can't forget. I might be overhyping it was just one page, but still, it stuck with me for years later. It also just shows how fearless Hal Jordan really is, and yeah, I don't think there's any chance that you'd ever see this in a Batman book, but we got it in a Green Lantern one, and for that, I'm going to be thankful. But the number one reason why I think Geoff Johns' Green Lantern run is just the best is because it was the perfect jumping on point for new readers, but it was still also a great re-entry point if you've been a long time fan. It would have been very easy for any creator to have come on and just abandoned all the continuity that had come before and sweep the history of Hal Jordan under the rug and just start afresh and act like nothing had happened. Or act like this was the next part of the story and not really give new readers a chance to jump in. But somehow Geoff Johns managed to do the unthinkable and bring both of those groups of people together and still give us a great story and a memorable series that went on for nearly a decade. There's a reason why I put this as one of the first picks in my Where to Start Green Green Lantern video. It's got a little bit of everything, and it was so important to me when I was first getting into this hobby. If it would have just been the 6-issue Rebirth series, yeah, I would have still enjoyed it, and it would have helped me get introduced to this character, but I probably wouldn't be sitting here doing this video. It's how Johns managed to build on that momentum with a character that people either dislike because of what he did in the 90s, or just straight up didn't know who he was altogether, and make him the character at DC that you had to pay attention to. So I definitely recommend it. It's one of the most important books to me when it comes to comics, and despite the fact that it does have its flaws, I still think that it's just the best. But that's the video, hopefully you enjoyed it. I want to try and do more of these positive videos, so in the comment section below let me know any other series that you want to see me do a just the best on. But until next time, just make sure that you stay safe, and stay mad all you dogs. Woof woof! See you at the next video.